The US has imposed sanctions on Venezuela's state-owned oil firm PDVSA and urged the country's military to accept a peaceful transfer of power. National Security Advisor John Bolton said President Nicolas Maduro and his allies could no longer loot the assets of the Venezuelan people. Efforts by the opposition to unseat Mr. Maduro have increased in recent days. The US and more than 20 countries have recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as interim president. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said the proceeds of the purchase of Venezuelan oil would now be withheld from Mr. Maduro's government, but the company could avoid sanctions by recognizing Mr. Guaido. Venezuela is heavily reliant on the US for its oil revenue, sending 41% of its oil exports there, while it remains in the top 4 crude oil suppliers to the US. Mr. Maduro later announced he had told PDVSA to launch political and legal action in US and international courts to protect its US subsidiary Citgo. Mr. Bolton and Mr. Mnuchin said the sanctions were intended to prevent Mr. Maduro's government from taking funds from the state oil company. We have continued to expose the corruption of Maduro and his cronies, and today's action ensures they can no longer loot the assets of the Venezuelan people, Mr. Bolton said. The US action blocks all PDVSA property and interests subject to US jurisdiction, and prohibits US citizens from engaging in transactions with them. But Mr. Mnuchin said US-based subsidiary Citgo could continue operations if its earnings were deposited in a blocked account in the US. Mr. Bolton also urged Venezuela's military to accept the peaceful, democratic and constitutional transfer of power. As Mr. Bolton was announcing the sanctions at a Washington news conference, observers spotted a handwritten message on his notepad. It read 5,000 troops to Colombia, though it is unclear what this means. One observer suggested the apparent gaffe may be an infringement of operational security. Mr. Bolton declined at the press conference to rule out military involvement in Venezuela. A White House spokesperson later said when asked about the note, as the president has said, all options are on the table. However, one US official anonymously told AFP news agency we are not seeing anything that would support a possible troop deployment to Colombia. Earlier in the day a state television broadcast showed Mr. Maduro welcoming home diplomats recalled from Washington, D.C.